Hello and welcome to this edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. It's Monday, August 11th, 2025. And according to the Gaza Health Ministry, 61,499 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's genocidal war against the Gaza Strip. 153,575 have been wounded or injured. 14,000 are reported missing, and there is no end in sight yet to the war. The first half of our program today is going to focus on the worsening crisis of acute malnutrition and starvation in the Gaza Strip. On August 8th, the Washington Post reported that nearly 200 Palestinians had already succumbed to starvation. But experts widely believe that that number is an undercount for two reasons. The first is the great difficulty of reporting deaths in Gaza that do not occur at Gaza hospitals, the source of information for the Gaza Health Ministry. And the second is because malnutrition leaves patients more vulnerable to infections and conditions that also lead to death. What is unmistakable, what is absolutely categorically clear, is that starvation is sweeping the Gaza Strip. So our first report today is going to be by Bassam Ouda, an independent Palestinian journalist whose reporting you've seen on this program before. She's going to give you some important background on the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF for short. It's a deadly scheme concocted by the United States government and that of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel to deliver very limited amounts of food supplies to the people of Gaza. Now, this foundation has been the site of savage and wanton killing and injury of Palestinians who are simply seeking food for themselves and for their family. The Guardian newspaper in London published a detailed report on August 9th. Its reporters examined bullets, medical data, visual aids, visual videography, for example, and also evidence that was provided of patterns of injuries reported by Gaza hospitals. And their reporting concluded that their quote appears to show a sustained Israeli pattern of firing on Palestinians seeking food. Once again, the evidence that the Guardian studied closely, bullets, medical data, patterns of medical injuries reported by hospitals, and visual data appear to show a sustained Israeli pattern of firing on Palestinians seeking food. According to the United Nations, at least 1,373 Palestinians have been killed since May 27th. They were seeking food. 859 were killed in the vicinity of the GHF sites, another 514 along routes leading to the sites. Additionally, the Red Cross Field Hospital in Rafah, a city in the southern Gaza Strip, has treated more than 4,500 Palestinians wounded since May 27th. A majority of them were injured also while seeking food for themselves and their families. After we hear from Bassam Ouda about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the starvation crisis in Gaza, we're going to hear a videotaped testimony by Tony Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar is a veteran of the Green Berets. He volunteered to be a private military contractor working at one of these 4 sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And when he arrived there, he witnessed atrocities being committed by Israeli soldiers and by U.S. contractors. Because he's a man of conscience, he severed his contract, he returned home, and he reported on what he saw. I want to thank Senator Bernie Sanders' office for posting this video testimony. We'll then move to an interview with Dr. Nadi El-Haditi. She spoke with Sky News about her time volunteering as a physician in Gaza. And as with other testimonies by doctors that you've seen on this program or read about, what you're going to hear is graphic and it's disturbing. We'll close the first part of the program with an editorial by Tony Kieran. He works with the documentary division of Al Jazeera called AJ+. He reflects today on the meaning of the words never again. Never again Auschwitz was coined in 1966 by a German intellectual. And ever since, it has been a rallying cry and a moral imperative for activists and people of conscience who want to stop future genocides and crimes against humanity. But what do these words mean today? Never again, as a live-stream genocide plays out in Gaza, and when leaders of Western nations, by and large, have turned their back on the people of Palestine. We will close the program with an extended interview by Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! With Mouin Rabbani. To my estimation, he is one of the foremost and astute commentators on what's happening, not just in Israel-Palestine, but across the Middle East. And he spoke with Ms. Goodman about Benjamin Netanyahu's declaration that the Israeli military will once again reoccupy Gaza City and central Gaza. He describes this as, quote, the first phase of a larger plan, end quote, a plan that will lead to the permanent displacement, occupation, and annexation of the entire Gaza Strip. That'll close our program. But first, here's Bassam Auda talking about starvation and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in the Gaza Strip.
The GHF, or what they call the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, has nothing to do with humanity.
بده يلعبوا معاك لعبة الحبار، شوي بخليك تقدم، شوي بطخ عليك.
ما رحتش اجيب لكن اخواتي بموتوا من الجوع، ايش بدي اعمل يعني؟
And that's why people are dying on the food lines, in the sandy hills. Yes, the scenes you are watching for the people dying literally just because they're waiting for food.
قاعدين ب5 شهور الجيت، بس انا ما كنتش اكل، ما كان السبب هي سبب سوء تغذيه عندها انه فيش اكل، والطفل الرابع هو استشهد، وفى يعني بين ايدي وانا رايحه اوديه على المستشفى، مش مستعده اخسر حدا ثاني لو على روحي.
This is the forced systematic starvation that is broadcasting in live on front of the world.
حياتي قبل الحرب كنت بشتغل شيف مشاوي، يتعدى يعني كل اللي بنجيبه لا يتعدى 50 شيكل 60 شيكل، يعني خلينا نقول يوميت. يعني انا قادر اجيب الحاجات هذه، بمقدرتي ان اجيب الحاجات هذه يعني باقل التكاليف كانت. ولكن انت اليوم ما فيش عليك دخل، ما فيش حدا بيقول لك خذ، ما فيش اعانات، ولا في الأونر ولا بطلت تسلم، ولا المطبخ العالمي، ولا في تكيات، ولا في أي حاجة في البلد. فأنت اليوم مضطر ل4 أطفال كيف بدي أطعميهم؟
What makes everything worse is that even those INGOs working for decades in the context of Gaza Strip, and now they're not allowed to work on their distribution points. By the way, during the ceasefire, there were more than 400 distribution points. People were able to get food and aids and dignity. All of them could reach food without being targeted or killed.
والله أنا بدي أقول لك يعني كل المواقف صعبة. من 8 ل 2 يعني مدة كبيرة جدا. أنت قاعد في منطقة عسكرية وكلها خوف. فتحت صارت الناس تجري، ومن شدة التزاحم فأنا ماشي في أظن في سياخ تبعت الحلبات، خبط في ايدي ومزعت تقريبا 7-8 غرز في ايدي. قعدت تقريبا لي اسبوع ونص قاعد، واليوم ان شاء الله قررت انه اطلع.
غصبا عني يعني انا عارف انه حتجعني وعارف انه في وجع وعارف انه مش هيك مش حطيب لمده، بس مش حقدر اعمل حاجه يعني. انا كيف يعني بدي اطعم اولاد وكذا، لو بدي استنى لما تطيب مش حاكل لا انا ولا اولاد.
The GHF opened these points about 5 to 6 weeks ago, and it's literally a death trap. It's only a cage where people are not allowed to reach the food, the very limited food parcels and boxes, until the GHF opens the fence for them. So they enter with hundreds of thousands of them to only limited boxes, fighting on these boxes, and also being shot. The humanitarian aid, it's weaponized by Israel to break the will of the Palestinians, to humiliate them, to kill them more.
والله اليوم الوضع صعب جدا، كان صعب جدا جدا، اكثر من 4 ساعات واحنا قاعدين بنعاني طخ وقتل وموت وصبات وشهداء وكل شيء يعني. كل سلاح العالم قاعد بضرب عليه، وانت عشان ايش؟ عشان تروح تجيب لك شويه اكل.
قديش نسبة الناس اللي جابت؟
نسبة الناس اللي موجودة نسبة كبيرة جدا، كبيرة جدا جدا يعني. آلاف مش مئات، آلاف الموجودين غادي، ويا ريت ليش مستاهل يعني. ما روحش 5% من الموجودين اللي أخذوا يعني. أنا هيك زي ما أنت شايف إيش اللي أخذته ولا حاجة. ما بكفيش يوم للأولاد يعني. أنا مجبور الحين كل يوم أروح أجيب. الحمد لله ربنا رزقني. بس هياته برغل، بكيت معكرونه، هاي بكيت معكرونه، بكيتين معكرونه وبرغل.
بكم البرغل؟
لا يا عمي مش للبيع، مش للبيع والله يعني. هذا 6 ساعات غدا عشان نهضر ونشتري نبيعه، مش باستهلاك.
ليش عارض؟ طب
مش للبيع يعني، مش للبيع. تلاقيه من الساعه 6 الصبح قاعد غادي. لا يا عمي مش للبيع
يعني. تقدر تقول انت انتحار يعني، مصيدة، لعبة. بيبقوا يلعبوا معاك لعبة الحبار، شوي بخليك تقدم، شوي بطخ عليك، شوي يعني ما فيش فيها إنسانية نهائي. من أول ما تتخذ القرار لحديت ما أنت تروح بخير وسلام. كل موقف بصير معاك صعب جدا، كمان صعب جدا للغاية. والله احنا في الاول يعني بصراحه يعني ما حدش كان متوقع انه يقدر يروح غادة على مناطق زي هذه، مناطق عسكريه. هم جايين يقتلوني، كيف انا بدي اروح عندهم؟
انت شايف الدنيا مسكه والاسعار غاليه يعني. يمكن اروح يعني الله اعلم اروح امتى وانا عايش يعني. هذه رحلتي.
خلص منهم اللي دوري شعور.
مجبور الخاطر انه تروح.
ما فيش اللي بيقدم قدامه ولا بياخذ يعني. شهداء كثير واصابات كثير، مش حنقدر على الفاضي، مش حنقدر يعني. انا ست الشباب بخاطروا في حالهم لجوا. انا بخاطر بس بقدرش اخاطر جوا كثير. اني اقول هذا ابني، فبسيبوه خلص بضلوا في حمايتي يعني. ممكن
ايش الحاجات اللي اخذتيها؟
رز وسيرج وعلبة غندور هاي اللي طلعت فيها. حتى الكيس الوش كيف ما وزعوه. رز خليت السيرج وغندور. صراحة ما بتوزع. عن كتر الناس ومن كتر هذا يهزم ما فيه. شايف كمية العدد الناس كيف؟ شايف الكمية هذه؟ ولا ببلاش. بس بعد ايش؟ بعد معاناة وموت. والله عندي كيف؟ خبطت في الشحن.
Unfortunately, the malnutrition and that affects the bodies of the children will last for them forever, will be passed through generations because it's truly affecting them. 1 million children are now surviving over air, nothing to eat, polluted water, and a glimpse of hope that anyone can help them. This is so serious. It's the third time to reach the peak of starvation, but this time is totally different. More and more people are dying, and tens of thousands are about to die because of starvation.
أنا أم ل8 أطفال. أول نفر عندي سالم وبراء وحمودة وغزال وكريمة. عندي الحمد لله الله مكرمني، حتى لما بروح على التكيات وزي هيك ما بيقدروش يعبوا. ليش؟ لأنه بكونوا ناس كبار ومش قادرين. عندي ابني تعال يا سالم بسبب يعني التكيات وهدول إنه بروح طلع كيف صار فيه حروق بوجهه. طلع واليوم في عينه ورحنا لقينا فيها نزيف ساير، والطفل الرابع هو استشهد. سبب يعني موته كان سوء التغذية، إنه سوء التغذية حد كان عنده ما قدرناش نوفر له الأكل ولا نوفر له أي شيء إنه الطفل يقدر إنه يأكل. فسببها إنه توفى يعني بين إيدي وأنا رايحة أوديه على المستشفى. طبعا لما بيصحوا شو ما بفيش شيء ياكلوه، لما يطلبوا مني اكل او يطلبوا مني شيء ما فيش غير يعني كان انه احنا نقدر نعمله ونقدر نطبخ لهم.
So the reason for me wanting to come forward and share this story is apolitical. The distribution method, the delivery of aid, is not being done in line with American values.
20 Palestinians were killed while trying to get to food aid distribution sites.
My name is Tony Aguilar. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel Green Beret from service in the United States Army. I served for a career of 25 years. I've deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan in combat operations and numerous other operational deployments. So I spent a considerable amount of time in Gaza during my 45 days in Israel. I was under a contract by UG Solutions, which is the security apparatus under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I felt it was a noble cause. I felt it was a good mission to feed the people of Gaza. So I did sign up and go on the contract. The IDF gave us, SRS, UG, they gave us our marching orders. They told us which sites we would deliver from, when we would deliver, how much aid we would deliver, how much time we would stay on the site to deliver, what type of aid we would deliver. The IDF controlled and directed every aspect of the delivery of aid. From the very first day, distribution at Site 1 has been chaotic, pandemonium. The best way that I can describe how the Palestinians reach the site to receive aid is akin to the Hunger Games. Survival of the fittest. Whomever can run the fastest and the furthest to get to the site first gets the aid. So those that are typically left with receiving no aid, no food, no type of aid are children, women, disabled. The sites themselves, in terms of the process for having the Palestinians leave the distribution site, was done through shooting at them, hitting them with pepper spray and tear gas, firing rubber bullets from shotguns at them. And this isn't something that happened just once or twice. This happened every day at every distribution, at every site. This is not hyperbole. This is not Hamas propaganda. This is not Gaza Ministry of Health saying it. It's me. I've seen it. The contractors on one occasion, on the 29th of May at site number 4, opened fire with his individually assigned weapon into the crowd, at their feet, over their heads, and into the crowd. As he did this, he celebrated what he was doing and he yelled, "Woohoo!" Then another contractor who was standing next to me said, "I think you got one." The contractor that was shooting then replied, "Hell yeah, boy." I took the video. I was there. I saw it. I watched it happen. The contractor that said, "Damn, I think you got one, man," was referring to a Palestinian man that fell to the ground and never got up. It's within my assessment that he was dead. And another incident on the 2nd of June at distribution site number 1, which is in the south in Rafah, I witnessed a UG contractor throw a stun grenade into the crowd. The metal fuse top of the stun grenade hit a Palestinian woman in the head, and she immediately dropped to the ground, lifeless and motionless. A donkey cart was brought onto the site to load her onto the donkey cart to remove her from the site at the direction of the SRS operational leadership. She was dead. This happened on the site. On the 28th of May, we submitted a report to the leadership of UGS and Safe Reach Solutions that site number 3 in particular was dangerous and that people would die if changes were not made. Those changes were not made. And on the 16th of July, 20 people died.
20 Palestinians were killed Wednesday morning at its food distribution site in Khan Yunis.
Palestinians, human beings, trampled to death on a site that we could have prevented. Those deaths are on us as Americans. We're complicit in that. In the dozens of distributions that I was a part of at every site, not one time ever did I feel a threat, assess a threat, see a threat, never saw a weapon, never saw a gun. The fire, the actual small arms fire that we received on the locations at times came from the IDF in our location. The entire city of Rafah has been razed to the ground, so there is no civilian population around the sites. They have to travel 8 to 12 kilometers one way, on foot, no vehicles. Most of them don't have shoes, poorly clothed. They haven't eaten, they're starving. There is no water that's distributed in the humanitarian aid. And to get there, they have to walk through an active war zone. On 2 occasions, I bore witness to a Palestinian man in one instance and a Palestinian woman in a second instance that were carrying their dead children. And these children didn't die from gunshot wounds or from sickness or disease. They died of starvation. I've seen it with my own eyes. I witnessed it on the ground in Gaza. Americans don't set up food to a starving population and have them walk through a war zone just to then shoot at them and hit them with stun grenades and pepper spray and then send them on their way. That's not the American way. That isn't in line with American values. After 25 years of service, when I hung up my uniform, I didn't hang up my oath. And my oath is to the Constitution and to the values of this country. Not to a president, not to a Congress, not to a company, but to this country. And I think most Americans would agree with that. The distribution itself is not feeding the population of Gaza. In fact, we are starving them because we are providing them with so little. The mechanism in place right now does not work. It is my job to make sure that the American people know this, because our tax dollars are going to this. Your tax dollars, U.S. taxpayers, are funding this. When I was hired on the 14th of May, signed my contract, that was supposed to run through the 21st of August. On the 14th of June, at that point, I had witnessed indiscriminate shooting, inappropriate use of force, dereliction from the leadership. I brought these each circumstance to the leadership with a recommendation and solution on how we could address this. I was committed to seeing this succeed. When the leadership ignored it, that was my red line. That crossed my moral threshold of what I could put up with. And I left. I terminated my contract and I came home.
The US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the Ambassador to Israel, US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, have inspected a food distribution centre in Gaza today in their first visit to the area. This comes after the UN warned that famine conditions are tightening their grip, in their words, on the Gaza Strip, with an increase in malnutrition-related deaths. Joining me now is Nada Al-Hadithi, a UK doctor who's just returned from Gaza. Nada, appreciate you joining us. We'll go to your experience in Gaza in a second, but now you're back and reflected on it. What has it made you think about?
Just makes me feel that we need to have a ceasefire now. We need to get humanitarian in now. We should have done it months ago. This situation is absolutely desperate, and a school classroom of children are dying every single day.
When you were there, did you see the increase in malnutrition before your eyes?
Yes, absolutely. From the first week I was there until the end, 3 weeks later, it was a tangible difference in the amount of starvation and the emaciation of our patients. Even the severity and relentlessness of the bombings was worse. I mean, it was mass casualty after mass casualty, with people being blown up in their tents, which were meant to be in green zones. The situation was catastrophic.
And some of those people who were shot at by drones in their tents were some of your own colleagues as well. One in particular, a father and his children were killed. Tell us more about that.
So Ahmed Salah was the most patient, joyful, hardworking man I've worked with, and he always had a smile for us. He was always concerned about us, and we were like, we're here to help. He's like, are you okay? He was dedicated community service, and he was a really skilled practitioner in theatres as a scrub nurse. And he was followed home one day, and this is eyewitness testimony from other healthcare workers in the hospital, by a quadcopter drone. And it didn't kill him on the route where he was on his own. It waited until he was in his tent and greeted his 3 children and killed all of them. And their bodies were brought to the hospital. And it's a real loss. This isn't just one case. His case is devastating to me because he was my friend. But actually, more than 1,500 healthcare workers, according to the UN, now have been killed. And in Nasser Hospital alone, more than 10 scrub nurses have been killed. And this has direct impact on the quality of care we can give our patients. And if you just step outside even more, the staff members themselves are starving, their family members are being killed, and yet they're still coming to work. Never before have I seen such dignified, committed people.
We heard from doctors in recent days, also working in Gaza, urging Steve Witkoff and Mike Huckabee to visit the hospitals to see for themselves what is, in their words, really going on, and not the aid distribution centres. Did you yourself, obviously you saw what was going on in the hospitals, did you yourself see what was going on outside at all? Did you see those aid distribution centres? Did you see the rushes to get that food that people so desperately need?
So I didn't go to any of the aid distribution centres, but my colleagues did, because they were absolutely desperate and their children were starving. And at any point where they heard that there was a food drop, there'd be, panic amongst the people of, are we going to be able to get there? Are we going to be able to get food? One of the main topics of conversation every day was how much was a bag of flour. And in Nasser Hospital, a lot of staff weren't being paid, so they would do these additional shifts in the EMT hospitals where they would get 200 shekels for the day. And a bag of flour, 1 kilogram bag of flour, which isn't enough to feed a family of 5, would cost between 150 and 250 shekels.
Yeah. Where are they buying it from? Because there is this accusation, isn't there, from Israel, the Israeli government, that the food is being taken by those who are then selling it at exorbitant prices on the black market. Is that what people are having to resort to? I mean, if they're desperate, they're going to try and get it from wherever they can. Is that what was happening?
Look, I'm not a politician. I'm here as a humanitarian. And what I saw were emaciated children. The crucial point is that before the war, there was about 500 trucks of aid coming into Gaza every day. And remember, Israel has complete control over every entry and border into Gaza. And so they were allowing about 500 trucks a day. And since then, and you can look at the UN figures, it's been less than 10%.
Yeah.
And this is a decimated population who have had more than 6 Hiroshimas dropped on them. This is a land that is about a quarter the size of London. The entire strip of Gaza is a quarter the size of London. And they've been moved into 14% of that land because 86% is been called an evacuation zone, and they've been actively bombing those areas. So now you've got 2 million starving people in the same size as Exeter, which in our country, in our census in 2021, had 130,000 people in it. That's 2 million people with no water, no sanitation, no food, no medical supplies. On the 22nd of July, when I left, Israel Army bombed the WHO medical warehouse. And there were people on my convoy with me that were still shaking, that literally were lucky to escape with their lives. And these were international volunteers. They were told to evacuate at 4 o'clock, and the big tanks came rolling through the compound gates at 11 a.m., shooting at will. And there's no accountability. All you have is our testimony, because journalists, as you know, aren't allowed in.
We certainly do know that, yes. There have been embeds, of course, but very carefully controlled by the Israeli authorities. I think it's also fair to say there is that border with Egypt, which is also sealed shut, and no aid can cross that either. Appreciate you're not a politician, you're a doctor, humanitarian trying to do work on the ground, but when there are people around you talking about this kind of thing, this desperation, what kind of thing are they saying? What are they saying about the lack of aid, the control that's being exerted?
The Gazan people are the most community-minded and supportive people I've ever met in my life. I had patients sacrifice their own medical equipment and food to give to children on my ward under my care. And despite the situation where they feel that the world has completely abandoned them, they are still coming into work, dignified and doing their best for their communities every single day. So yeah, there's a huge amount of stress and strife. There's a huge amount of pain because people are losing their family members, their loved ones. I had a patient who was 21 years old. She was 6 months pregnant. She was blown up in her tent. Her husband was killed. She lost her eye. She had an open fracture, and both her legs were completely destroyed from the bomb blast. And she was pregnant. When I was pregnant, my husband wouldn't let me be in any state where I could be harmed in any way. And this woman is completely emaciated with no vitamins, no food. And one day her baby stopped moving.
Nada, can I ask, do they talk about the control that Hamas has exerted over the Gaza Strip at all?
I had no witness of anything to do with Hamas. I was allowed completely free reign around the hospital because there were originally 17 ICU beds in Nasser Hospital and it had to be extended to 98, where literally outpatient cardiology waiting rooms were turned into wards. I was frequently wandering around the hospital looking for patients because there's not usually any plastic surgeons in Gaza. So whenever international medical teams come on board, we need to actually find the patients that could do with our help. And so I wandered around and never saw any sign of anything like that.
Final question. Are you going to go back?
I would like to go back, but the Israeli government stop about 50% of applicants who get approval from the UN and the WHO. So there's a real risk that they won't let me back in, but I would be very keen to go back and support my patients and my friends.
Nada Al-Hadithi, appreciate you joining us today on Sky News. Thank you.
The West said never again after the Nazi genocide. But did they mean that to apply only when the victims are white? I'm Tony Karan, I'm the editorial lead at AJ+, and as a Jewish person, I was raised with these images of genocide seared into my brain from a very, very young age. It was grotesque images of Jewish bodies deliberately starved and brutalized by the Nazis that horrified the Western world to the point of prompting the resolve that genocide, the crime of crimes, could never be allowed to be repeated. And yet, here we are, seeing the images that echoed that same horror, documenting the same physical effects of deliberate starvation and brutalization, this time on the bodies of Palestinian children, and this time with the perpetrators being Jewish. Now, how is this monstrous inversion even possible in a world that has for decades insisted that this could never be allowed to happen again? let's be clear, it's happening only because it is being allowed to happen. It's being allowed by the impunity that Israel is guaranteed by its Western armorers and enablers. And perhaps that impunity is maybe a horrifically twisted extension of the sensitivity to anti-Semitism prompted by the images of the Nazi Holocaust when they first appeared. Because Israel has shamelessly and cynically over the decades claimed the Nazi Holocaust as license for decades of settler colonial violence against the Palestinians it displaced and subjugated in order to create the State of Israel. In recent years, its advocates have even codified as anti-Semitic any statement that actually compares Israeli actions and policies with Nazi behaviors. Their problem is that Israel's actions invite that comparison. The images produced by those actions, which the world now sees in real time, make such comparisons unmistakable, whether or not the words are spoken. Nazi violence against Jews required that Jews be dehumanized in the minds of Germans. They used the term Untermenschen, inferior races. The Germans were the Übermenschen, the Herrenvolk as they called it, the master race, and the Untermenschen, the inferior races, were not worthy of being treated as human beings. So the never again guardrail against genocide really begins with the sensitivity to and fierce rejection of any dehumanization of any group of people. The problem for Israel is that the settler colonial project, the violent displacement and subordination of an entire people, which is what was necessary to create Israel, depends on dehumanization. As we've seen throughout the Gaza genocide, Israeli leaders are constantly comparing Palestinians to animals, to talk about human animals, talk about beasts. The consequences of such dehumanization was the focus of the film Zone of Interest, which won the Oscar a couple of years ago. This is a film about depicting the indifference of a German household living next door to Auschwitz. And the filmmaker Jonathan Glazer, who is Jewish, in his acceptance speech at the Oscar caused a stir because he said, this film is not about the past. This is not to say, look what they did then. It's rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. Glazer was hardly alone in making that connection. You can find dozens of examples over the years. The Israeli philosopher Yehashua Leibovitz in the late 1980s causes a stir by coining this phrase Judeo-Nazi, saying that there's a Judeo-Nazi spirit driving the settler colonial occupation that would infect and doom all of Israeli society. Major General Yair Golan warns in 2016 that he's seeing in Israeli society the nurturing of an extremist behavior and attitude that basically is what in Germany had led to the Nazi Holocaust.
פוגרומים. הם הולכים לעשות פוגרום באנשים חפים מפשע.
Knesset member Ofer Kasif more recently likens Israel's plans for the Palestinians of Gaza to those of the Nazi regime to expel Germany's Jews in the 1930s. And then very recently, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert describes these plans for a humanitarian city that the Israelis are planning in Gaza to a concentration camp. These supposedly anti-Semitic connections between Israel's actions and Nazi actions have long been made by many Jewish public figures elsewhere in the world, and now with increasing frequency given what's happening in Gaza.
The reason that I think it's important to use the word ghetto is because it gives us language for what is happening now, which is that the ghetto is being liquidated.
You can't be more evil than what they're doing.
We've seen many Jewish Holocaust survivors warning over the years that they're seeing echoes of the same dehumanization and genocide that they survived in Europe.
I'm protesting against the misuse and weaponizing of the memory of the Holocaust as a cover for the current genocide by the Israeli government.
When I found out about the Holocaust, and I thought, how could the world have let this happen? Well, I don't wonder anymore.
So how do we make sense of the catastrophic moral failure of those who have for so long professed never again to halt a genocide that's actually within their power to stop? Talking about the Western powers here, they're not only failing to stop it, but they're actively enabling that genocide by arming the perpetrators and providing the impunity that they need. Could it be that these powers, in their actions and in their discourse, tacitly accept the dehumanization of the Palestinians, in the same way as those powers had for centuries themselves dehumanized the peoples that they had colonized? It was in 1950 when the grotesque images of the Nazi Holocaust first emerged to horrify Europeans that the anti-colonial writer Amy Césaire called it a boomerang effect. He said the genocidal violence that Western powers had waged for centuries in the colonies had now come back to smash Europe. And he says, before they were its victims, they were its accomplices. They tolerated Nazism before it was inflicted on them. They absolved it, they shut their eyes to it, they legitimized it, because until then, it had been applied only to non-European peoples. So the images out of Gaza don't lie. Like the images from the Warsaw Ghetto, they really leave no doubt as to what's transpiring there. So today, Gaza should make us ask, how far has the West really progressed in refuting the deep-seated racism that allowed it for centuries to dehumanize, brutalize, and massacre people it colonized? Is there any explanation for Western acceptance and enabling of the Gaza genocide other than racism?
Israel's Security Cabinet has approved plans by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to take over Gaza City, spurring international condemnation as world leaders warn of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of a full-scale Israeli military occupation. In response to Israel's intensifying military campaign, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced today Germany will suspend the export of military weapons to Israel that could be used in Gaza. The move stops short of a full arms embargo, but marks a significant shift in Germany's position. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the decision wrong, adding, quote, "It will only lead to more bloodshed." UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk urged for the plans to be immediately halted and that the move, quote, "runs contrary to the ruling of the International Court of Justice that Israel must bring its occupation to an end as soon as possible and to the right of Palestinians to self-determination," unquote. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid also condemned the decision to seize Gaza City, saying on social media, "This is a disaster, which will lead to many more disasters, a disaster for generations to come," he said. Ahead of the late-night Security Council meeting, Netanyahu told Fox News he, quote, "intends to take over all of Gaza." Netanyahu spoke to Fox News' Bill Hemmer in Jerusalem Thursday.
Will Israel take control of all of Gaza?
We intend to, in order to assure our security, remove Hamas there, enable the population to be free of Gaza, and to pass it to civilian governance. That is not Hamas and not anyone advocating the destruction of Israel. That's what we want to do. We want to liberate ourselves and liberate the people of Gaza from the awful terror of Hamas.
Netanyahu claimed Israel would not seek to govern Gaza, but rather turn the territory over to unnamed Arab forces. Palestinians in Gaza reacted to Netanyahu's calls to take over the besieged strip.
Netanyahu's decision to occupy Gaza, it's like there's nothing left to occupy in the first place. We're already dying. 100,000 deaths every day. Around 100 to 150 people die daily from starvation, on top of everything else we're going through. Practically all of Gaza has been squeezed into the western part of Gaza City, and that's all that's left. Just that. West to Gaza City. At this point, for the people, there's no difference anymore, whether he occupies it or not.
This comes as the Israeli TV station Channel 13 revealed Netanyahu deliberately imposed starvation in Gaza, restricting aid to the besieged enclave as part of a strategy to force Hamas to surrender. Internal government transcripts from March show Netanyahu repeatedly ignored calls from senior ministers to move to the second phase of the ceasefire agreement to release the Israeli hostages. For more, we're joined by Mouin Rabbani, Middle East analyst, co-editor of Jadaliyah, and a non-resident fellow at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, also a non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Mouin Rabbani is a contributor to the book Deluge, Gaza and Israel, From Crisis to Cataclysm. Mouin, welcome back to Democracy Now! First, respond to the Security Council's endorsement of Netanyahu saying he's taking over Gaza City, and then respond to the international outcry that has ensued, including a voice we haven't heard condemning Israel before, and that's Germany.
Yes. It wasn't the Security Council, it was Israel's Security Cabinet that took this decision to seek to seize physical control of the entirety of Gaza City. And I think it needs to be seen as the first phase of a larger plan enunciated by the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. In the clip you just showed, where the objective is to take control, physical control of the entirety of the Gaza Strip in the context of unachievable objectives, basically ensuring there isn't even so much as a water pistol left in the Gaza Strip. And it's really a recipe for permanent occupation, annexation in all but name, until Israel's international partners agree to that. And I think we have to recall what Israel's strategy has been from the outset, which is the expulsion of the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip outside the territory and retaining this territory under permanent Israeli control. That's really what's going on here. As far as these statements of criticism and condemnation are concerned, I think we have now reached, in fact, we long ago reached the point where words are entirely meaningless. In the context of a genocide, if all you can do is to criticize and condemn, while continuing, as in the case of Britain, intelligence overflights over the Gaza Strip that directly benefit the Israeli military, or now even in the case of Germany, banning the export of weapons that can be used in the Gaza Strip, and good luck figuring out which can and which can't. These are basically political theater, performative acts. Yes, they do signal a shift in the position of this or that government, but they still fall very, very far short of meaningful, concrete measures that can persuade or force the Israeli government to change course.
I should correct myself. Germany didn't exactly condemn what Israel's doing, but they did for the first time, saying they were stopping weapons to Israel that could be used in Gaza.
Correct. Yes, I was referring specifically to Germany, and the condemnation has come from some other quarters. But, you know, we have to recall now that Israel has been very clear that it intends to force the evacuation of the entire population that remains in Gaza City southwards, then to take full control of that area in order to seek to eliminate the remaining Hamas fighters that are based there. You know, just earlier this year, Israel implemented a very similar plan known as Gideon's Chariots, and that was supposed to produce precisely the result Israel now says it is seeking to achieve. It's been 2 years now where Israel has been unable to achieve its declared military objectives. And this should also lead us to question what are its real objectives. Is it simply to seek to militarily defeat Hamas, or is it to destroy the Gaza Strip, to reduce it to rubble, as we've seen from these recent images that have emerged? And perhaps it's time to start taking Israel at its word when it says that its objective is to, in its words, implement Trump's vision of expelling the entire population of the Gaza Strip. Maybe that is exactly what they're seeking to do, and maybe responses to Israel's statements and actions should be based on that.
Israelis also took to the streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem Thursday to protest Netanyahu's plans to occupy all of Gaza.
We are here demanding the end of the war, the immediate return of the hostages, end to the atrocities in Gaza, atrocities about the children in Gaza, and atrocities against our own soldiers and against our own hostages. This war is a political war. The only person that benefits from this war is Benjamin Netanyahu, that's trying to avoid jail.
So that was Ami Dror. Mouin Rabbani, the response within Israel at this point, do you see it changing? And then I want to ask you about what Netanyahu is talking about when he talks about these unnamed Arab forces he's hoping will take over Gaza.
Yes, so 2 points. If you look at the internal Israeli debate about this issue. On the one hand, there are objections to this plan from the military leadership, which have now been essentially overridden by the government, and that is based on the military's estimation, that it is not capable of a prolonged war, a prolonged insurgency. It's designed for short, sharp, decisive wars. It lacks sufficient manpower and material for the task that has been assigned to it. And on the other hand, you have those from some of the Israeli opposition parties and sectors of Israeli public opinion basically stating that Israel has a choice. It can either continue this indefinite genocidal military campaign, or it needs to reach an agreement with the Palestinians that puts an end to this war and results in an exchange of captives, because that will be the only way that Israel can successfully retrieve its remaining captives from the Gaza Strip. What I find telling in this debate is that no one is saying we shouldn't do this because of international sanctions that could result. In other words, Israel is acting in the full confidence that whatever it does, it will enjoy, if not the support, at least the consent of its key sponsors and allies in the West. Regarding this other point, there's a fundamental contradiction here. On the one hand, Israel refuses any form of Palestinian administration in the Gaza Strip, not Hamas administration. It equally rejects any Palestinian Authority administration or any other Palestinian governance, while at the same time, it is seeking to recruit essentially an Arab expeditionary force to take control of the Gaza Strip. But no Arab state has volunteered. Even Israel's closest Arab allies have refused to participate in this scheme because from their point of view, they're only willing to participate in any initiative that is embedded within a credible and irreversible political initiative that leads to the end of the occupation and Palestinian sovereignty in the Gaza Strip. And given that Israel's project is precisely to prevent that from happening, I don't see it getting off the ground.
The Economist wrote a piece this week, How Much of Gaza is Left Standing. It says, quote, the broader demographic toll is hard to grasp. The studies imply an estimated life expectancy has fallen by more than 35 years to roughly half the pre-war figure. In percentage terms, this drop is bigger than the one recorded during China's Great Leap Forward. In absolute terms, it's similar to the one in the Rwanda genocide. Your thoughts, Mouin?
Well, it's more proof, if proof were indeed needed, almost 2 years after this began, that what we're dealing here is not a military campaign in which civilians are inadvertently being killed as a result of what's called collateral damage, but that it is in fact the civilian population which is the premeditated and intended target of this very wide-scale killing spree that Israel has been engaged in. And that is precisely why every major human rights organization, whether Palestinian, international, and now even Israeli, has concluded that we are dealing here with a genocide. And most recently, in the context of the intensifying famine in the Gaza Strip, we now also have a report from Doctors Without Borders saying that basically this scheme that has been established by the United States and Israel, known as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is in fact an orchestrated campaign to weaponize urgently needed humanitarian supplies, and that this mechanism is effectively acting as a death squad. I know you recently spoke with the whistleblower, Anthony Aguilar, about this, so I won't comment further.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
As always, thank you for watching the program. I'm Mark Hage. This is the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel, and we'll see you soon.